No More Heroes 2: Desperate Struggle is a contentious game to say the least. Some people love this game, some people hate this game. Where do I sit on that spectrum? Well, that's what this video is for, if the title of the video didn't clue you in already. One word to describe the story is confused. Actually, here's another word for it: pointless. Pointless in that this has all been done before, better in the first game, just with a more generic coat of paint. That paint being revenge. 3 years have passed since the ending of the first game when Travis returns to Santa Destroy so he can take on Skelter Helter, younger brother of Helter Skelter. Who's that, you might be asking? Well, I don't know either, so let's just move on. Halfway through the fight, we're interrupted by a vision of two people sitting together in a room divided by glass. It's a mystery who these people are, but the lady seems to know a lot about the bosses we fight, so who knows. We'll see plenty of these scenes throughout the game, and it is also one of the main reasons why I think the story is so messy, but more on that later. Cut back to the fight and we see Travis come out victorious, with Sylvia showing up soon after. She informs Travis that the UAA is now a real organization, and he has been dropped in rank all the way down to 51. Hey, I see what you did there. And that he should climb the ranks again, because why not? Travis, of course, accepts, but that is cut short when the mostly dead Skelter Helter informs the Itaku that one cannot kill without consequences, and Bishop is shortly killed after in a way for someone to reenact their revenge on Travis. After receiving a nice gift in the mail, Travis learns from Sylvia the person who killed Bishop is one Jasper Bat Jr., the owner of Pizza Bat, and he just so happens to be number 1 in the UAA ranks. So Travis must once again fight his way through the ranks, meeting some familiar faces along the way, so he can take on Bat and get his revenge. It's a simple plot on paper, and that's one of my main problems. It's a little shallow, and that mostly stems from the rogue gallery. With one or two exceptions, I couldn't really care less about these guys. They serve their purposes as bosses well enough in that they are formidable foes for Travis, but that's really it. Remember how in the first game each boss had a lengthy cutscene to flesh out their characters? Well, you can kiss those goodbye for the most part. Now most of their backstories are told to us by the girl behind the glass. To their credit, most of them have interesting backstories, but with us being told all this in a vision, we don't get the banter between Travis and the boss like the first game. Any sort of dialogue is usually shallow. Travis's lines are the sort of shit he'd say to try and sound cool at the beginning of the first game, but here the player is supposed to take it seriously, and I'm sorry, but some of these things he says in this game make me wince in pain.
Everybody deals with grief differently, right? Some people fuck at funerals. I cut off heads.
The only time I think this lack of dialogue works is with Ryuji. Travis shows up on his bike, Ryuji on his, and no words need to be said. They just look at each other and they know what must be done. A mutual understanding between Travis and his opponent. It's a great scene and a powerful use of wordless storytelling. It's just sad that this scene is ruined by one of the worst scenes in the game, in my opinion, where Sylvia mows him down with the assault rifle and yells at Travis about how these fights are some game. It's a prime example of one of my biggest problems with No More Heroes 2's narrative. One of my personal issues when it comes to stories and games and movies is the excessive need to beat the audience over the head with their themes. Being afraid to leave anybody behind. Nobody likes to be shaken and someone yells, "Don't you get it," in their face. I understand that the assassination world is bad. I learned all that in the first game, so why does this game feel the need to hammer that in now? Especially since in the beginning of the game we are back to glorifying this sort of lifestyle like Travis's mindset from the beginning of the first game. It really undermines any sort of attempt the game makes at trying to be serious. It really feels like the game cannot make up its mind about how it wants to treat its story. Does it want Travis to act like a badass that can do no wrong, or does it want him to be more introspective about his actions? Most of the time it's the former, so when it tries to be the latter, it just comes off as melodramatic and I can't take it seriously. I hate to bring up this scene because it's so infamous at this point, but the scene after the Alice Moonlight fight. Travis, you haven't given a shit about the people you've killed for like 90% of the game. Why after all this death on your quest for revenge do you care now? It comes off as a shallow attempt to be dramatic. It's the same sort of issue I had with the gene reveal at the end of the first game, but it's doubly worse here because of the game's tone. The shift from the goofy first three-fourths to the melodramatic seriousness of the game's last quarter is way too abrupt for me to really care. I kinda lied at the start about the story being confusing. It's not necessarily the story itself, but how the game chooses to present it, undercutting any sort of serious moments it tries to pull off later due to the beginning not giving me any real reason to care. One of the reasons I thought Travis was so interesting in the first game was the growth that he showed throughout. It was the world surrounding him that made sure that he underwent that growth in the first place. The world of No More Heroes 2 has no problem letting Travis act like a dumbass, because why not? It's a sad regression of his character that just makes the narrative painful. Pointless as well, because the crash course in development he experiences at the end was already done miles better in the first game. I'm not asking for high art from No More Heroes, but I do expect a little more substance than this. A quick aside to talk about the graphics. If we're talking about pure graphical fidelity, I think this game looks the best out of the four, but something about the art direction seems off. Maybe it's the much more grimy aesthetic, or the fact that it almost looks like everything is burnt. Sometimes the characters are so glossy they look like they're made of plastic, and I know that this isn't the last time I'll have that complaint. The first game isn't much of a looker either, but the harsh black shadows went a long way in hiding the rough parts. Something just seems amiss here. Anyways, the graphics aside is over. So clearly I'm not a huge fan about the story. It has its moments, but that's all they are to me. What about the gameplay? Well, what was once quick and snappy is now slow and plotty. Attacking in this game feels so loose. It feels like I'm steering Travis in the direction I want to go, rather than controlling him. It's something that you have to experience to truly understand what I mean. The high and low stances are back from the first game, but are no longer shown on the UI, so it's kinda hard to tell which one you're doing if you're using motion controls. Button controls have been mapped to different buttons like the last game, so it's much easier to know and chain attacks together. The instant kill is back as well, but with no indication on the UI, you never know if you're going to actually do it when you walk up to a downed enemy. Melee attacks and wrestling moves are back as well, and to complement something, there is more variations in melee attacks, so it's easier to chain them together. In retrospect, I miss how wrestling moves in the first game have all sorts of directions you have to move in to pull them off, even one that has you spinning the controller in circles. It's something that I was sad they didn't bring back here or for 3. Spoilers for that game, I guess. The slot machine power-ups are back, but most of them aren't that interesting, except the tiger transformation. That's pretty cool, and it helps you end it faster. The dart step is back, yet it's so extremely picky whether it triggers or not that it almost never happens. Even when I try to trigger it, it just never seems to work. I don't know what happened to blocking either, but I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I'm standing there not attacking. You should be blocking, so why do I still get hit? I don't know if certain attacks can only be blocked with certain stances. I don't want to harp on this for too long because it's a well-known issue with the flow of combat, but I don't know what happened here, but everything just feels lesser, and sadly that doesn't just stop with the combat, but other aspects of the gameplay as well. I must ask again, what happened here? So the stages. Do you like fighting brain-dead enemies that pose no challenge? Well, that's what most of the stages boil down to. Maybe drive down an empty highway here, do a stealth mission there, and that's about it. Outside of the combat is where most of the changes happen. With the complete removal of the open world and the fight entry fees, which totally wrecks the pace of the game, where you can just marathon all the bosses in a row in the most mind-numbing way possible. Not to mention, with no open world means no lobby cough balls, which means all those cool abilities from the first game are gone. The only one that's here is the jumping slash, and it's still as useful as it was in the first game. Then the bosses. If you thought that you'd be fighting 51 bosses since you ranked 51, then you'd be wrong. Some get iced by a boss, 24 cheerleaders, and the others are killed by the aforementioned familiar faces. How about we go through those bosses for Skelter Helter. Alright, first boss. Shows you the basic enemy types, melee, weapons, and guns. Nathan Copeland. Honestly, never had too much of a problem avoiding all the traps, and it's pretty funny how you can get him to get hit by them. If you can get him alone, he's pretty simple to fight. Charlie McDonald. Cool idea, but he only has like 3 attacks, and that super move he can do I've never seen before, because it's just that easy. Kimmy Howell. Pretty good fight, that's all I really have to say. The bubbles are the only attack you really have to worry about. Matt Holmes. The first boss I'd actually call bad. The extremely cramped arena that makes it hard to avoid getting hit, the fact that the camera gets stuck on said arena, the flamethrower that makes it so you have to sit around waiting for him to stop, and the fact that he can sometimes just hyper armor through your attacks makes this one big pain of a fight. The only interesting thing being that he can get stuck on walls if he attacks them. Chloe Walsh, once again a cool idea on paper, just not executed all that well. Avoid these extremely slow moving clouds of poison as she sits in them, making it so you have to wait around, and that grab is so easy to avoid that it's laughable. Dr. Let's Shake, a boring waiting game where you have to dodge one laser. Ooh. Million Gunmen, a generic fight with a man with a gun. Perfect for such a generic boss. And the platforming with Shinobu sucks ass. New Destroy Man, when you have to fight both you constantly take pot shots from the one in the back, and when you have to fight one, it turns into a boring waiting game that can take forever. Who playtested this and said it was okay? The only good thing about this fight is that you can get one Destroy Man to hit the other with the projectiles. Ryuji, the first boss that I think is great. The bike controls at the start are horrible. Maybe it was a good thing that they took out the open world, but the real fight is very enjoyable. Other than that, Dragon's hitbox is massive, so it seems impossible to dodge. Mimi, fine I guess, not much to say. Henry's dash is cool. Margaret, she can prolong the fight if she decides to run away all the time. If you can time your dodges, this fight's pretty easy. And the song is great, both versions. Captain Vladimir, the shield is very annoying, especially since it seems to wrap around him even though it's just a rectangle. He throws some rocks that are easy to dodge and shoots lasers that you've already seen before with New Destroy Man and Mimi. He does try to nuke you with a massive laser though, so you gotta respect that. Alice Moonlight, the second of two bosses that I'd say is great. The atmosphere, the music, and it's just a fun all-around duel. It all comes together. And finally, the final boss, Jasper Bat Jr. The less I say, the better. The first and third phases are boring and the second is bullshit. If you've played the game, you know well enough, so no need to dwell on it. So that's all the bosses. 2 great bosses, 3 terrible ones, and 10 mediocre ones. And that's a pretty good summation of how I feel about the game as a whole. There are some great things, there are some awful things, but most of it rides that middle line of mediocrity. This video might have seemed like all doom and gloom, but I don't loathe my time playing this game. There's only a few select moments that I truly can't stand. I can see why people despise this game, but I can also see why someone could find it enjoyable. For me, it's that quintessential 5 out of 10 video game.